IKEA were looking to develop a project that would have an impact. Originally, they were looking at people experiencing homelessness and came up with the notion of designing a small home. The things that were important to IKEA when we were invited to the One Home, One Planet event that they host in Washington, they talked a lot about circularity and clean construction and affordable housing. As we looked at those main headings, what we wanted to do was make sure that those things were embedded in the concept that we were developing. So we're actually in that fourth phase at the moment of researching somebody who moved into the property last Friday and now has a new home for the first time. And it was an incredible collaboration.
Before we go into the podcast, if you could just go and rate this show on whichever platform you're listening to it, it makes a huge difference to the podcast, the amazing conversations we get to have, and the incredible guests we're able to get on the podcast. So it's probably not something you would think about, but if you could just go rate the show, follow it, or share an episode, it does make a huge difference to the show. Thank you so much. In a world increasingly facing the challenges of climate change, with the Building Green podcast, we will dive deep into the intersection of architecture, design, urbanism, and environmental responsibility. I'm Ladina Schipf, your host. I've been an architect and building site manager for the past 10 years. During my studies at ETH in Switzerland, as well as in my working environment, I've had many touchpoints with sustainability, like many of you, I guess. I've also learned to question what I've been told, which is why I decided to go deeper into the topic and uncover what sustainability actually means. My mission is to highlight the transformative power of sustainable architecture, not just as a practice, but as a catalyst for broader societal change. Subscribe for more of our content and enjoy the show. What if IKEA's next flat pack product was a tiny home? James Andrews shares the fascinating story behind designing a tiny house with IKEA, built not only to just shelter, but to heal. In this episode, we explore how architecture can support well-being, from trauma-informed design principles to the surprising ways natural light and private spaces affect our health. We also challenge common assumptions like whether open-plan living might actually harm our well-being. James' insights into designing for sustainability and humanity will leave you rethinking the spaces we live in. Thank you so much, James, for joining me. It's a pleasure having you today. Tell me your story. What was the earliest, let's say, experience in your life that sparked your passion for sustainable design and community impact?
Well, from the sustainability design perspective, I think in hindsight, looking back to where I grew up, in the Pembrokeshire Coast National Park in West Wales, my father was an architect, and he would take me to building sites and give me a lot of basics around architecture and vernacular design. And I sort of probably absorbed a lot of sustainability at that time, because you focused a lot on where the materials were coming from. You talked about craftsmanship. We talked about response to weather and climate. And all of those things were embedded in the vernacular. And when I went to university, sustainability was obviously in its infancy in terms of an architectural add-on. And I quickly developed an interest in it because at the time, some of the architects that were prevalent in the 80s were Richard Rogers and Norman Foster and Grimshaw, Renzo Piano, and they were all beginning to express the mechanical systems and the structural systems, and truly analyzing the amount of materials and energy that buildings were using. So it became a very interesting progression from that early childhood through to seeing these incredible architects developing their own mission around sustainability.
And what's your mission now? What kind of drives you?
That's changed over the years. Having really enjoyed pushing the boundaries of sustainability for building performance, I'm now truly focused on human performance. We build buildings for people. primarily. Yes, every now and then we'll do a dog shelter or something else, but we design buildings for people. And what do we want those buildings to achieve? Obviously, there's a civic presence that we expect architecture to have, and we love that in the different cities and how that's expressed by different cultures. But ultimately, it's spaces for people. And the work that we're currently doing is truly focusing on human performance and wellness in particular. How can buildings truly help people heal?
That's a great keyword. So I want to jump directly into kind of the first project. You collaborated with IKEA to build a tiny home. Can you tell me more about the project, the background story?
The IKEA tiny home at, I think, 500 square feet is probably the smallest project I've ever worked on, except I did put a green roof on my father's tool shed back in 1987, which was pretty darn cool experience. But other than that, the IKEA project was indeed a tiny project, but designed to have a huge impact. When we first met with IKEA, we were actually working on a 70-acre campus for behavioral health. And that campus had a whole series of buildings and users focusing on well-being. And they were intrigued with that notion and some of the tenets of design that we brought to that around trauma-informed design and trauma-informed care. And at the time, we had just launched our social impact studio, which is directed by a social worker. And what Scott was doing was informing the architectural and planning team how trauma-informed care works. And then we were working out how does that dovetail with trauma-informed design tenets, talk about safety, comfort, choice, and connection. So IKEA were looking to develop a project that would have an impact on, originally they were looking at people experiencing homelessness. And could this be a donation? Could this be some furniture design? What truly could it be for them to have an impact? So we spent a few days in their offices in Conshohocken, just north of Philadelphia, and came up with the notion of designing a small home. And obviously IKEA don't build houses. They provide the furniture for our houses that's beautiful and sustainable and affordable, and all of those things that we know as the largest, I think, furniture retailer in the world. So moving into actually architecture was fascinating for both parties to understand what were the strengths that each could bring to this. And it was an incredible collaboration designed around the project was to focus on research, design, construction, and then research. So we're actually in that fourth phase at the moment of researching somebody who moved into the property last Friday and now has a new home for the first time. That person's experienced homelessness for many, many years and has had a very traumatic life experience and is now living in the IKEA home and will be getting ready for Christmas. And so I probably digressed a little bit there, Ladina. So let me go back to the process a little bit as you asked about the relationship with IKEA. We realized that from the outset there were opportunities to do something a little different with the IKEA brand. So we considered the things that were important to IKEA when we were invited to the One Home, One Planet event that they host in Washington every 2 years. This year, when we were there, they talked a lot about circularity and clean construction and affordable housing. So as we looked at those main headings, what we wanted to do was make sure that those things were embedded in the concept that we were developing. So could the house be sustainable? Yes, of course it can be. but can it also be adaptable? Can it be deconstructed easily and recycled? Can it be built minimizing waste? Can it be built minimizing or maximizing, in this case, wood construction? As you probably know, IKEA have invested tremendously in forests around the world and really wanted to push the boundaries with wood with this project. So we thought about it conceptually through two main lenses. One of them through the trauma-informed design lens. If this was going to be a permanent supportive housing home for somebody that's experienced homelessness, what should the design be able to do to help heal?
That's a big question I have in my head.
Yes, I'll come back to that. And hopefully we'll dig into that in a lot more detail. But also, of course, we had to answer a lot of the brand questions around sustainability and even construction. So we looked at making sure that what we designed could be prefabricated and delivered fully finished and just simply offloaded off a trailer. So there were size constraints, obviously, for that on highways that we needed to be disciplined about. Or could this be made up of a series of panels, just as you buy a piece of furniture from IKEA and you screw it together and you put a cover over it and within an hour you have your sofa. So how could we do that? Or thirdly, if somebody simply wanted to buy the plans, could they construct this design themselves in a very traditional framing manner? So the design was able to accommodate all three of those typologies, as well as meeting the very high sustainability standards. And I'll give you an example of those. Not only were we considering insulation levels and air quality, but we were looking at some of the challenges around the acoustics. That's very important for people living in a home, that external noises are screened, but also the internal environment feels very soft and cozy. So the other thing that we studied in great detail, because we'd learned through our research the importance of connection with nature and daylight and how that impacts circadian rhythms. And you're seeing a lot of that now in hospital design. And we designed the window pattern and size of the windows to meet the WELL sustainability standards. And then, of course, we did all of the daylighting modeling on that. And curiously, even though we were able to maximize the daylight, that was one of the feedback issues we had with the consumer groups that we interviewed was, the windows are too big. I don't feel safe. So there was this very interesting relationship between somebody who's experiencing homelessness and wants this deep desire to feel safe in their home and the impact of daylight to improve their health. So this is something we actually struggled with. And even though they said they wanted the windows to be this size, we've made them a little bigger, smaller than they were originally, but a little bigger. Why? Because we hope in time, as that person heals in the home, they will literally open up, feel more connected, want to look out, want to feel the sunlight coming in, want the view of the trees and the nature and their community. So that's a very interesting balance that we are playing right now, knowing we didn't design it specifically to the end user's needs, but also it's right in between what the WELL standards say we should have.
That's super interesting. Especially, I was just thinking, if someone's experienced homelessness for a longer period of time, could it be that being in a home after a few weeks could feel like too small and too enclosing in a way?
Not from the experience and the people that we've interviewed. We interviewed, there were over 40 interviews that we carried out. I'll step back a little bit. We built a mock-up in the local IKEA store here in San Antonio, and we brought people in to let them sit inside the unit and experience it and give us the feedback. And that's when we got the feedback on the windows and some other issues as well. Literally, some of the issues were around, how do the windows lock so I can feel secure. So that was a great reminder to us about security. And that really did help us understand that sense of size and enclosure, safety, security. And in fact, there was much more feedback that talked about how cozy this was, how spacious it was. And we didn't get the reaction of, I need to be sleeping under the bridge, which sometimes people assume is what people want. That's, from our experience, that is not what they want. They're trying to create a space that they can be secure wherever they happen to find that space. And it's usually far away from other people because they're often the major threat, of course. So our ongoing research will be able to give us some more data. So perhaps in a year's time, you can be asking me those questions. We have one of our researchers, Philomena, who's going to be doing the post-occupancy human performance evaluation. And what we've already done on that is we've already sort of created a baseline, and we'll be working with the new owner of that home, or to truly understand how they react and how they heal and how the unit works.
How can I imagine this? Is IKEA going to sell tiny houses? We can walk into the store, buy a tiny house, and build that ourselves then?
Wouldn't that be wonderful? I think that would be fantastic. I have to admit. And the way, as I said, this was designed for different types of construction, it provides people a lot of opportunity. Could you buy a series of panels and actually do your own little Lego version of whatever it is you want with the panels? Or do you have to stick rigidly to the form that we designed? Could you buy them to be simply, that's all you would want to change, pick your furniture? I'd want a green sofa instead of a white sofa. All of those questions people have been asking us. We get phone calls every day. Can I buy one? Can I buy one? Can you design one for us the same? We've had tremendous response to this project. And even within other nonprofit groups in Texas, we have people asking, can we buy 10? Can we buy 6? We have a need for permanent supportive housing within our community. So the response has been incredible. The other media response we've got from different outlets has been incredibly positive around the design. The site that the house was donated to is called Town Twin Village here in San Antonio, which is a permanent supportive housing project, primarily for people over 50 that have experienced homelessness. So we have it in a very good research environment. So that's something that we're happy with. So coming back to your question that everybody's probably waiting for me to answer after rambling on about all of that is, I don't know.
Okay, but that's not a clear no, so it's interesting. I'm going to see if I found some information about it in the future.
As soon as I know, I will let you know.
And so you said you got a lot of positive feedback, a lot of interest. How do you see it influences the future of affordable housing?
Well, I think that was one of the primary goals that we had when we had very early discussions with the IKEA leadership here, was what can we do that can have an impact? How do we, perhaps the word leverage is wrong, but how do we use the opportunity for IKEA to have conversations with people who are responsible for either policy, design guidelines, for affordable and permanent supportive housing in America? Can we create an overlay of trauma-informed design principles that may be required, just as there are sustainability standards and codes? Could this be something that is built in? Because some of the research that we've read shows that 70% of Americans have experienced a life-changing trauma in their lives, which affects their mental and physical health. So if you can imagine you have been on the street, having a home to go to where somebody has actually considered your situation. Again, that just must be so comforting and reassuring. And I think going back to the very beginning of this conversation, when we look at building performance and human performance, something that I believe is going to become a much larger consideration over the next decade is that true understanding of human performance in buildings, and how do we care for others? How do we care for the disenfranchised in our societies? And perhaps spend a little less time worrying about what Kim Kardashian and whomever is doing and how they're spending their money in building the mega mansions, but truly understanding that our cities and our communities truly need help and thought put into what I would call the everyday.
I think in general, there's like kind of a move in society towards very specific problem solving. So really understanding a specific problem really well and solving that specifically. So you talk about different types of traumas. What could be other types of traumas that people have experienced that are maybe not related to homelessness?
Well, I think here in San Antonio, where we are a very significant military, what we call military city USA, we have 120,000 people here involved in the military. And we have an incredible hospital here and a facility called the Intrepid Center, where we see the wounded warriors coming home without limbs, without eyes, traumatized deeply. And so I think post-traumatic stress disorder is something that we see here firsthand in this part of Texas, and understanding what are the triggers and how do we minimize the impact of those triggers so those people can begin to heal, because it takes time. And the studies of the brain that people have done shows that it takes many, many months for the frontal lobe to begin to recover from a trauma to be able to make good decisions about their life. So I think PTSD is one area that I think people have already spent a lot of time thinking about, and the work that the VA is doing here in America has that at the forefront. So that's one area. And then you've got the other thing that we're working on right now is a child advocacy center, and child abuse is another major issue in San Antonio and Bexar County. There are thousands of cases of child abuse reported each year, and there's a fantastic new facility here called Child Safe that was designed using trauma-informed design principles to make sure that the children arrive and can not be frightened about an institutional experience. And some of the things that those children have to go through are extremely traumatic. So I think understanding that our children, it's not just a 25-year-old soldier coming back from war, but also our children need to be cared for, and we need to understand the types of spaces and the triggers that can cause episodes for them as well.
That's a very, very deep and heavy conversation, or intense conversation. I thought I entered this conversation thinking I was gonna learn more about sustainable building and sustainable building methods, but I'm kind of in this conversation, or I'm going to leave the conversation really understanding that architects don't just have an impact on society and our world, but also very specifically on people's lives very, very intensely. So, James, if you could recommend like one design principle from that project for homeowners to apply, what would it be? Or let me rephrase the question. What's like one small change a homeowner can make to their living space to make it feel more restorative or trauma informed?
Finding opportunities to connect to nature. Nature is an incredible healer. We all know that when we go for a walk in a forest or we look out over a lake, there's something very calming about that. So there's a thing called blue therapy. When we do look at the horizon and across a lake or an ocean, our brain is able to calm down. It's lack of clutter in our view shed. And the forest gives it to us in a similar way, but it creates fractals, which are very calming with the way that the plant that I'm looking at to your right there, the leaves and the forms of all of that, is very relaxing as well. So how do we bring that blue therapy, those fractals, that connection with nature? And the colors of nature are often incredibly calming as well, the predominant colors of the greens and the blues. So in your house, bring in some plants, and they're also good for air quality. As all of the sustainability experts know, right? They're great for air quality, but they do give you that visual interest and that connection with nature. And also something I do every morning is I pull back my sheer curtains and my blinds, and I have a good look outside. And particularly in the winter time, make sure you pull those curtains back and you get that daylight in, and you have the opportunity to look at something.
And for people who don't have a house next to the sea or a lot of greenery around, is it enough, or can we bring that nature in with materials, textures, photographs?
Exactly. I have a photograph of a sunset over my favorite beach in my living room where I grew up in Wales as a great reminder of those times. So yes, photographs are a good reminder. Color, of course, and it can be done with a throw over your sofa. It can be done with cushions, but also think about the colors of the rooms that you walk through in your house and what you want them to do. So I often advocate for kitchens to be a light yellow color. It's sunrise, right? It's telling you it's the beginning of the day as you go into the kitchen in the morning to make your breakfast. So what are the colors that you can associate with the activities that you want to do in your home? Where are the energetic spaces? Where are the restful spaces? And then simply apply simple color theory to those.
What colors do you recommend homeowners in the different living areas?
Well, in my bedroom, I have a very light blue color, which is very calming. As I said, my kitchen is yellow. I have an orange in my study. Now, believe it or not, you say, well, isn't that where you want to go and focus? But for me, it's where I want energy. Right? That's when I'm thinking about design ideas. So the orange colors, the energetic colors, just like you see in advertising, they're supposed to attract your attention and get you all excited. So just thinking about that. But I think the simplest thing to do would be to bring in a plant that pretty much does everything. And then also you have to care for it, right? You have to look after it. And you have to make sure it thrives. So there's sort of a responsibility there, taking care of something, which I think is good for us.
If you're enjoying the show, I have a small favor to ask that would mean the world to me. By rating and sharing the podcast, you're helping us grow and spreading our mission of making sustainability really desirable and cool to a wider audience. Besides of that, imagine impressing your colleagues with the latest insights on sustainable architecture. So make sure you follow the podcast and become the most informed in the room. Thank you so much for your support. So back to the IKEA tiny home, you mentioned that you're studying now that somebody's living in there, how he feels and all that. What are specific metrics that you're using to find out if the home improves the residents' well-being and kind of the community engagement?
So I will tell you what I was asking our researcher to do and what I wanted to do as an architect. But you're going to have to interview Philomena to get all of the scientifics from her. And I think that will be a fascinating follow-up, or even to speak with Scott about how the community is reacting. But I will tell you a couple of things from the architectural side. First of all, we deliberately designed the unit to fit into its context. So that was something that we felt was important. We didn't want this form or the materials to be something that was deliberately a wow. Right? We didn't want this to feel sort of a Ferrari in a parking lot of Fords, whatever it might be. Because that, within the community, that could create some resentment why does that person get the super cool new big thing? So it wasn't about making this stand out. It was about making this feel very comfortable. And we talked a lot about what is the form of home. And we drew and we asked people on the team to draw home. And so after that research, when we met with people at Town Twin, we gave them the opportunity to apply to move into this home from their existing trailer that was on site. There are about 30 trailers on the site, or from their existing tiny home. What we didn't want to do was move somebody in who was a new resident that was coming off the street into the community, because the baseline would be something probably very dire. And therefore, this would be incredible, right? This would just be so much better than where they've been sleeping under the bridge or couch surfing or sleeping in the back of their truck. So we didn't want that as a comparison. What we wanted was somebody that was living in an existing tiny home to move into this home, or living in a trailer and move into this home, and be able to compare and see how they engage with community. Do they engage with community more? Do they invite somebody over for supper and cook for them? Do they sit on the porch in the morning with somebody instead of alone? Is the house cleaner, tidier? What are the things that would reflect somebody's well-being? So we actually studied the existing home that the person lived in to make sure that there was a like for like. So we did create a baseline. So as we all know, some people are tidier than others, right? We all have our different habits. And what we wanted to make sure was that we understood that person before we moved them into the home to create that baseline. Now, I'm particularly interested in whether they sleep better at night, right? We all know the value of sleep and what that does to our psyche. Do they engage more with others? Are they more extrovert? For me, that's a sign of wellness, but that's me as an extrovert, right? When I meet an introvert, I'm like, what's wrong with you? You know, what's going on? So that's why I'm not doing the research, because I'm probably far too biased about making sure they get up in the morning, make their bed, and they're running a mile. So Philomena will answer those questions, Lavina.
I will definitely reach out to her and see if we can go deeper into that. Now, James, let's talk about the social impact studio at your design firm, West East Design. What sets it apart from traditional architecture firms, and especially in addressing homelessness and community challenges?
Well, when we've now been practicing for 28 years, and when we hit our 25th year milestone, Chris and Catherine Kim, the owners, realized that this was really an opportunity. What were they going to do next? We had great clients, some wonderful projects, and amazing staff. Was this an opportunity to do something different? And we talked a lot about the impact that architecture can have. And Chris is an incredibly thoughtful architect. And we came up with the notion of creating a studio that focuses on thriving communities. How do we help those communities? And we were very lucky that the first project we got was a community center for the city of San Antonio. So we were able to really dig into that concept of how are we going to build a project that truly focused on that community. And we carried out a series of workshops with the community and different stakeholders from the community. We came up with concepts, they were tested, they were voted on. We had all kinds of cool graphics to explain really what the community needed and how the money was going to be spent. And we spent 6 months doing that. We didn't just spend 6 weeks. We truly came up with what the community wanted. It was their project, it was their taxpayers' money going into it in their community. So after that, we thought, wow, this is really exciting work. We have not just one client, but we have thousands of clients that are now contributing to having a say in what we do. So we decided to formalize the studio and bring in an old friend of mine who I'd worked with on a project called Haven for Hope. back in '07, which is probably the largest homeless shelter in America. It's 300,000 square feet of facility on over 20 acres in downtown San Antonio. And Scott Ackerson was the vice president of Haven for Hope for 8 years and worked on the programming side and truly bringing trauma-informed care concepts to that campus. And we worked together on various projects in Santa Fe and Albuquerque and other places, helping cities understand their homeless challenges. So we had lunch with Scott, and we simply said, Scott, we think we've got a studio that we could build around the combined experiences that we have. And he was working for an affordable housing company at the time. And we thought, well, wow, that's another great thing we can bring to this. How can we improve affordable housing in America? So the Social Impact Studio is unique in that it has a social worker directing the studio, and he's built a team of researchers and policy experts to be able to provide our clients with a lot more than design services. So they're currently working in Washington State, in California, in Maine, in Kansas, and numerous projects across Texas right now, offering everything from policy advice, consultancy services around building plans to deal with affordability and homelessness, as well as stakeholder engagement and programming.
You mentioned you did like 6 months of research, of interviewing people. How do you approach that engaging community feedback during the design phase? What's like the most surprising insight you've incorporated into a project?
Well, at the time, we thought it would be through creating a website and creating online media and surveys and things like that. We thought that would be the epiphany and that would be it. But in fact, it was the in-person workshops that we had with the community that truly gave people the opportunity to hear one another, which is what you don't get when you do a survey. So when we were in a church hall, and there's 100 people looking at plans and discussing together in groups what it is they think the community needs, and you give them, I think it was about an hour and a half we had, and you just give them the opportunity to think about it. And the way we created the workshops, we worked with another local firm here, TPG Partners, who are landscape and urban planners. And we came up with this concept of creating a hardware and a software test or framework for the group. So we put down, we split the large group into tables of 6 or 7, and we put a site plan on the table and asked them to write down what were the hardware components and software components of the project. So the hardware being a gym, software being we want to play basketball, we want to do this, we want to do that, we want pickleball, we want whatever it is, yoga. So we then were giving them the opportunity to tell us what it is they wanted to be able to do, not just think about space as architects typically do. So we had some fantastic synergies then that came from that. And I'll give you an example. Instead of creating a senior center and a teen center, we've now combined those spaces because we realized some of the activities overlap. And the seniors don't always want to be totally separated from the young kids. And we realized that the young kids can often learn quite a lot from the seniors. So, and that's really what community is about, isn't it? It's not necessarily about segregation. It's about interactions. So the structure that we created for that truly allowed the community to respond and discuss. And at the end of the sessions, we would invite each table to the microphone and explain why they wanted to do the things they put on the table. And then, of course, our job was to aggregate all of that and then present back to the community, this is what we've heard. And then we went through that again. Well, that's not exactly what we want. And now we've changed our mind because we've had a chance to think about it. And we visited another thing. So raising awareness was truly the most important thing there, and allowing them time to think about this, because this facility, there'd been no investment in this facility for probably 30 years. And this was going to cover the next 30 years. So for many people in that community, that was the rest of their life. So it was very important. So a survey saying, oh, this survey will only take you 5 minutes, please tick these boxes, and we're going to create something that's going to impact your community for 30 years, isn't good enough.
So they are actually not that different from the typical clients who change their minds every time you talk to them.
I wouldn't say change their minds, refine their thinking, and have a lot more passion and buy into the project, which is truly what you want from your client. You want them, the day that that opens, them to be able to use that facility and fulfill their needs, and help those people in the community that need all those different services thrive. So no, we're okay with changing their minds. We think that's very much part of the process. We've all been shopping and, put something in the thing and then put it back, or we've returned it, right? With Amazon these days, I think you buy 10 things and return 3. So we're not the most decisive of creatures. So I think we have to understand that. And the more we learn about something and learn about the opportunities and share those aspirations with others, the more definitive we can be.
No, it's beautiful. The more you can involve them, the more responsible they also feel, and they'll take care of it more. So, James, you've worked on a very inspiring project, repurposing an old bank for a child advocacy center, which is a fascinating challenge. How do you redesign a fortress-like structure to feel welcoming and safe and engaging for children, while also preserving the functionality?
Right. So yes, we're in the middle of that challenge right now, Lavina. That is something that when the client invited us to participate in transforming a 4-story commercial bank building into a child advocacy center, which it would normally be designed to have a variety of scale of spaces that relate to children, provide a lot of transparency and connection with nature to deal with the issues we previously discussed today. How do we do that when we have a very, very different structure designed for a very, very different purpose? This building was designed to make your money look like it's in a safe place, right? I mean, that's what a bank is supposed to do as a building, as part of our civic architecture. So what we've done is we've taken the form of the building, and it's very narrow vertical windows, which when you're looking at a castle, they're called loops. So looking at those loops that are traditionally used to fire arrows and cannons out of, how do we turn those into something positive for that experience as a child instead of something very fortress-like? One person actually said here, well, it's kind of a cool-looking castle. Do we make it into a cool-looking castle? And then another one of our interior designers was inspired by a piece of architecture in England by the firm Thomas Heatherwick. And there's a fantastic project, I think it's in Leeds, the Maggie Centre, which is a beautiful biophilic-inspired cancer treatment centre. And there, they've taken these beautiful, slim concrete forms that move vertically throughout the structure and turned them into very tree-like structures. And it's an absolutely fantastic project for those listeners who haven't seen it. It is incredible. All of those projects, the Maggie Centre projects, are extraordinary and focus on healing. So we're going to be taking the concrete ribs that form the structure of this project and finding ways to celebrate them and bringing those shapes inside the building where they could become wooden forms to mimic the tree-like, plant-like, biophilic-like shapes that we're already starting with on the outside.
That's beautiful. And you've also talked about it in your projects. You balance like the private, semi-private, and the public spaces. How can homeowners apply or use this principle to improve the functionality and feel of their homes?
Yes, well, I think that goes back to, again, some of my earlier architectural lectures that we had around design method and psychology. And a wonderful architectural writer, Christopher Alexander, talks about he has a book called The Pattern Language. And he breaks down architecture into very simple chapters, 3 or 4 page chapters in his book Pattern Language. And they look at everything from a city scale all the way down to the functionality of a bedroom. And he talks about home as having 3 distinct spaces. You have to have 3 distinct spaces for something to become a home. And again, that was something we brought to the IKEA home idea. Instead of this being a tiny home that had lots of clever features with fold outs and drop downs and things, how in a small space can we create 3 distinct spaces? And in fact, we created 4 in the IKEA home. So those really talk about the fundamentals of how we live. When we think about a space where we sleep, it's like any animal. We close our eyes, you can feel vulnerable. How do we make sure that space feels incredibly safe and secure and quiet and warm, and all of those things that we typically look at, and truly understand that's what you're doing. So today we hear about people that, we're looking at Instagram all night on their iPads, and, how distracting that is and how that affects their sleep. So even the design of the separate spaces, whether it's your living room, your bedroom, your kitchen, or your porch or outdoor space that you may have a balcony, think about how they're supposed to be used and how you want to use them. And then make sure that there's an element of discipline in your life. And, leave your iPad downstairs. Don't bring it into your bedroom. It's not going to help you sleep. It's not going to help you with the things that need to happen in those spaces. So just that fundamental understanding of why we have distinct spaces. Now, I know some people live in an apartment where everything is open plan these days. And that can be challenging because you don't know whether you're cooking breakfast or going to sleep. So you probably have to figure out ways to divide spaces like that with bookshelves or different furniture to create those different senses of enclosure. I know that sometimes I go to a hotel and I go into the bedroom and it can just feel too big sometimes. You just go, goodness me, what am I going to do with all this space? And it's a long way over there, and it's this and that. And you get into bed and you just don't feel comfortable. If you've been used to a bedroom, let's say 12 by 14, and you go into this hotel and it's this oversized suite with a living room here and this and that, it can sometimes be a little disconcerting.
You played a key role in developing green building standards in Texas. What are the most valuable lessons you've learned from working on LEED projects, and how has this shaped your current work?
I really enjoyed the challenges of working as part of U.S. Green Building Council's chapter here in Texas. It's from its foundation, and the challenges of enlightening people around sustainability and what could they be doing in their buildings, and how do we train people to understand the different facets of LEED. So whether it's operating a building, designing a building, or building a building, all of those things are important from an educational perspective. And the buildings that I've seen built and the impact I've seen on the community has been tremendous. But some of the challenges were really all of the human side. Yes, there's wonderful companies out there providing great products. There's contractors out there building some fantastic buildings. But until you've got the endorsement of the people, it feels as if you're trying to shove something down their throat, I'll be honest, that they just do not want to eat. And they can become just challenging around that. Why are you telling me how I should do something with my money or my business or my this or my that? And that level of encouragement, enlightenment, I think we see it globally, whether it's with, the Paris Accord, on global leadership levels, we see political challenges around climate change and sustainability. And then when you bring that down into your community, it's often priorities. Can we afford it? Is it going to cost us more? And what we have to do in different parts of the world where there's different approaches to the price of energy and water and impact of waste is really help people understand the long-term impacts, both to them directly, whether it's a cost and use study. In 6 years' time, you're going to be, you'll have paid back that investment on insulation or more efficient air conditioning unit, or the impact on the environment and the community. But I think it takes steps to get there. For people to simply say, yes, I want to buy into spending money on reducing the impact of climate change globally and how that affects billions of people around the world, I think you have to start at home first. I think that's a really hard ask for people, and I think that's where we see the politicians struggling when they're listening to their constituents around, why are you doing that when our own community is struggling? When we have homeless people here, when we have people that can't afford their energy bills in the winter, and here we are trying to do this big global initiative. So I think beginning to create the right language around looking after your community first, and then how you can then look after another community, is the way we are approaching that now. So it's a shift from pure sustainability and telling everybody what they have to do and making them feel bad if they don't, to trying to ensure that we all live in a thriving community and can therefore help others.
That's so interesting. James, I have one last question for you. With AI and new technologies entering architecture, what role do you see human-centered, sustainable design playing in the future of the profession?
At my age, I am truly excited. I've always been excited with technology and how it can provide better solutions. Okay? Now, in the past, those have been, building information modeling systems that we've seen with BIM. There've been different calculation tools, but AI is truly, it's not just a new calculator. It isn't a tool. It is far more than that. And as a company, we are looking at the different ways that AI can help us in different areas of the business, whether it's with graphics, whether it's with surveys, whether it's with writing, whether it's with predictive analytics on performance. What I do know, it's going to be incredible. Do I think it'll put architects out of business? Possibly. And we will have to adapt. We will have to figure that out, right? We'll have to, as any revolution comes, the Industrial Revolution, we've seen how machines have transformed lives for the positive in many, many, many ways. The people that used to have to do things in factories in very difficult, dangerous conditions now no longer have to do that. There are machines to do that. We have different ways to mine and extract oils and harvest forests. And so all of those things have brought very positive impacts. So as an optimist and an extrovert, I am really excited about AI. I think it's an opportunity for us to continue to evolve. And if we are focused on the right things, and I think this goes back to that fundamental sustainability question, if in the backs of our minds we're thinking about how can it help communities? How can it help the environment? And focus on those things, then I think we have a very exciting 20, 30 years ahead.
That's a beautiful ending. Thank you so much, James. If our listeners want to follow your work, where can they find you?
That's a great question. I don't really have much of a social media presence. You can just contact me through Westie's Design Group.
Okay, and I'll link your LinkedIn profile in the description.
Super, that's a good idea. Yes, I do look at that occasionally.
Great. Thank you so much, James. It's been a pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you, Ladina, for the opportunity, and good luck with your future podcasts.
A huge thank you for listening. Make sure you subscribe to the show wherever you listen to the podcast to support me and so you don't miss an episode. And while you're there, I'd also be so grateful if you could rate and review us. If you have any guest suggestions or any feedback, you can find me on the socials at Ladina Schipf. Thanks.